All right, we're going through these sugyas. Each one is another case in Shas. So we're trying to finish all the cases where a Ben Sora, a Zaken Mamre, a rebellious elder, he could, according to the opinion of I think it was Rameir, right, who says that it has to be something that's connected to it's something something connected to his chorus. That if it was intentionally, it would be punished by chorus, which is punishment by death in heaven, and beshogeg, if it was unintentional, then you would have to bring a sacrifice. Okay, so we've gone through a few cases. Next case, ben dam ledam, ben dam nida ledam leda dam ziva ben dam ledam. It says in the verse. The verse says in Dvarim that quotes the source of the rebellious rabbi, elder. So it says, Kipalim chabdavar, the mishpat, ben dam ledam. Okay, so we learned what is mimcha, davar, and mishpat. What is dam ledam? What does it mean that he disagrees? So the disobedient elder disagrees. Hey, Aaron disagrees with the high court in cases of blood. So he says, ben dam ledam, ben dam nida, dam leda, dam ziva. There's three types of bloods that there can be three different disagreements where it could be a question of kares. Again, if a woman is impure and she is considered impure halachically, and she goes into the temple or eats from kachim, from holy article, from the sacrifices, then she's chayv kares for while she's tamei, consciously knowing that she's tamei, she does one of those things, or she if b'shogeg, she has to bring a carbon. So what are the three different types of bloods that there can be a disagreement? So the first one is b'pilkter kavi b'mahal v'rabanan. The first one is a coloring. Okay, so again, quickly, the laws of ziva and nida are halachically. Today, it's not practiced because of the doubts. So we're talking about the biblical halacha and before Talmudic times, where a woman in her cycle had 7 days of nida and 11 days of ziva, which means that the 7 days are clean days. The 11 days are clean days. That unless she sees 3 days in a row, then those are days that she's considered clean, and she shouldn't be seeing blood at those days. So if she does, then she's obviously has what's called she's considered a zava, which is considered that she's not well, and that's considered a kind of blood that's impure. Nida is the 7 days that's her cycle time. So as soon as she sees blood on one of the 7 days, so then she's 7 days impure. It doesn't make a difference if she sees 1 day or 5 days, but she knows her calendar. As soon as she sees blood on one of the 7 days, but she has to first see blood. And if she doesn't see blood, then it doesn't start yet. So the thing is like this. And also once she sees blood, she has to count 7 days. She has to wait 7 days, no matter when she sees the blood within those 7 days. So here the question is like this: that, and also biblically, even if she were to see blood for every single one of the 7 days, then it doesn't make a difference. After the 7 days are up, she goes to the mikvah and she's pure. She doesn't have to wait additional 5 days or 7 days that we do today. So that's only we're chayshish, we're concerned that maybe she's a zava. But according to the biblical law, if a woman sees blood for 7 days straight, on the 8th day she goes to the mikvah and she's pure right away. So the question is like this: the machlekes of kavi b'mahal and rabbanan is, what are the colors of blood that are considered tamei? So dam hayarik, a green kind of tinted blood, akavi b'mahal matame v'chachamim matarim. The kavi b'mahal says such a blood is tamei. The rabbis say it's not tummy, meaning to say, if a woman were to see one of those 7, that color green, that green tinted blood, and the rabbis, let's say the verdict was according to the rabbis, not according to Kav Mahalal, and therefore she would not be Keshuki. We're page Pezayin Amad Beis, towards the top. We're still going through the differences where Zaken Mamre, where if he rebelled against the court, could be chayv kares. So here the first case is in the dam, the color of the dam nida, which is according to Kavi Mahal. Kavi Mahal says that a green colored blood is considered a tummy blood. The rabbis say it's not considered a tummy blood; it's matarim. If the woman were to see a green colored blood and paskin according to Kavi Mahal against the rabbis because the Zaken Mamre told her that she's tummy, so she would start counting right away 7 days. And then 2 days later, 7 days later, she goes to mikvah. What happens if, according to the rabbis, that's not impure blood? And let's say she starts seeing the red colored blood towards the end. According to the rabbis, she only starts her nida counting from, let's say, halfway in between. Let's, like Rashi says, let's say she saw the red colored blood in the 5th day. So according to the rabbi, she has to wait another 5 days out. So she has to have 7 days from the 5th day. According to Kavim V'Hali, she starts counting on the 1st day, which is the green blood, which is Dam Tahor, according to the rabbis. So then she's Tameh, because she went, according to Kavya, she went to the mikveh 5 days earlier than she should have. And if she went into the Beis HaMikdash, and she would be in a situation where she's gone Tameh into the Beis HaMikdash. So here's a case where a Zaken Mamre would rule according to an individual like a Kavya Mahalal, where he would make the green blood impure. And then she would count her 7 days according to that Zaken Mamre. She would go to the mikveh 5 days earlier because her real impure blood, which is the ruling according to the rabbis, was a red-colored blood, not the green-colored blood, and therefore she would have to wait another 5 days to go to the mikveh. Well, that's a scenario where the Zaken Mamre who paskins according to Kavya, let's say Mahala, not according to the rabbis, that he should have, that could cause a situation of kares. Okay, so that's, we're going to only learn the Rashis if we have to, because basically Rashi is doing is it's beautiful. Rashi goes in and explains every case for what it is, because these are different situations of arguments in Shas. I think if you have any questions that are not clear, please feel free, and then we'll learn the Rashi or explain more. Okay, the next case, Dam Leda. What is the case of Dam Leda? Dam Leda is the argument of Rav and Levi. What's the halach of Dam Leda? Dam Leda is halach. Again, these are not halachics that are women. Like the Rambam writes, the women took upon themselves extra restrictions. No one today has relationships on Dam Leda. What is Dam Leda? Dam Leda is that the Torah permits a woman after she has a child and then she becomes pure from the childbirth. So then it's childbirth. Remember, this childbirth is different than ziva. So after she becomes pure from the childbirth, so then starts what's called dam leda. Dam leda is pure blood, meaning to say, although she's bleeding, for a male, meaning having a son, 40 days, and for a child, a girl, 80 days. Even though she's bleeding in those 40 or 80 days, she's considered pure, and you could have relations even while she's bleeding. After the 40 days is over, and this 80 days are over, it's no longer considered what's called dam leda, and then starts her cycle again, and she has to start counting the blood. The question is, does she have to stop? There would be 2 times that she would have to, that we would wonder if she has to stop bleeding. One is after the birth. So does she have to stop bleeding after the birth? And then when she starts bleeding in the 40 or 80 days, that's considered dam leda, which is tar. Or can she just continue the same bleeding from the birth, continues into the 40, 80 days? What about at the end of the 40 and 80 days? Does she have to stop bleeding? And until she stops bleeding, it's still considered dam tar. She only becomes impure after, hold on a second, after she stops, or not? Aaron, you're trying to ask something?
Me? No.
Okay, so this is a machlokes between Rav and again. So then it would be a question: if the blood is pure or not pure, it would be a question of going to the Beis HaMikdash and being chayv kares for being tamei. So where's the disagreement? The disagreement is like this: so Damle the pluk to the Rav Levi. The Itmar we learned. The Rav says mine echadu. That's one. There's one source of blood. Mine is a spring. There's one source of blood. The same source that starts off tamei goes into being tahar, and the same source becomes tamei again. Meaning to say, she doesn't have to stop bleeding. As soon as she finishes her time when it's dam tamei, she can go to the mikvah, and then the same source of blood is considered continues, and she's all of a sudden tahar to have 40 or 80 days on a son or a daughter. That's the opinion of Rav. He says, "Mine echadu." The Torah decides if it's tahar or not. Levi Amar, no. Shnei Bayin saying there's 2 sources of blood. Nistam Hatami, only after it stops bleeding of the non-pure blood, is Niftach Hatar, opens up the source of the pure blood. Nistam Hatar, Niftach Hatami, and only after she finishes her 40, 80 days does her cycle start again. Meaning to say, according to Rav, as soon as she finishes 7 days, then she could right away start having relations, and she's no longer she go to the mikveh and have relations, and therefore she's tar, and she could go to Beis HaMikdash. And according to Levi, then she can't go to the mikveh until she stops bleeding. Again, wherever the halacha would be, and the Zaken Mamre went against the opinion of the Sanhedrin, His question, two times is a question. One is when she finishes her impurity of after giving birth, and when she finishes her impurity after having what's called dam later, the blood, which is tar after a male and female child. According to Rav, that it's the same as soon as the 40 days or 80 days are over, she becomes tamei. And according to Levi, no, it has to stop, and therefore she continues to be tar. Means the 40 and 80 days, according to Levi, would be that if she stops bleeding in middle of the 40 days and she starts again, within the 40 days, she's still tar. But once she stops after the 40 days, then starts a niftach, it starts again the mayin of tamei, and therefore she's tamei. Only then she's tamei. So if the Rav would paskin, the Zaken Mamre would paskin, according to one of the opinions, which is against the halacha, comes the question of a tamei nichnas to Beis Hamikdash or eats from the impure, eats kachim that she shouldn't be eating. Okay. Next
Rabbi,
is,
I have a quick question. I know that these stories are meant mostly as backdrop to explain the Zaken Mamre here, but I'm just curious, is there an explanation in the difference between the reasoning of days for boy versus girl? I remember reading in Ein Yaakov somewhere years and
yeah.
years ago something to do with how the feelings that they had when they had a son versus a daughter, because the son would do Torah near Shemaim or something. I don't remember what exactly it was, but I was curious if you knew
Interesting.
why there's a difference
Oh.
between the days.
No, but interesting. I mean, this is clear. The Torah says these are days the Torah tells us in Parshas Tazri, I believe. Avi is
Okay.
about. I think it's after, but it's a good question. I don't remember if Rashi comments. I'm sure someone comments the reason of 80, 40 days. It could be what you were saying. That the idea was that she's more happy to have a boy, so therefore the Torah gives her less days.
Yeah, but that was from like a section in Yaakov and the commentary. I don't know, in Yaakov is made up of so much for Sanhedrin anyway. But that's more the Gadata that we're going to get to later. But this was just something that it gets brought up, and I don't remember if that had to do with the days or if something else related to when she was able to go to the mikveh again, unrelated to blood. But that's why I was curious if there was a difference. You said that these numbers are from the Torah specifically?
Yeah, Parshas Tazria. Yeah, I think it's Parshas Tazria. I think it's Parshas Tazria. Says the gives this. You understand? Halacha. The like the Rambam says, we became the women on themselves took upon themselves extra. Yeah. So
Yeah,
the
but I
pasuk
thought
says
that
like
was just
this.
on Hargasha. I didn't know that that was on this also.
No. They say, yeah, I think the Rambam writes there's no one who has relations on Dam later today. So the pasuk right away, pasuk Tazria says, "Daba b'nei Yisrael lemer isha ki tzazri v'yal dezach v'tam shivas yavim." She's tamei for the birth 7 days, k'mei nidas devasa, like a regular nida. And then she has 33 days on top of those 7 days. It means 40 full days, so 33 days. That teishav b'dmei tarasa, that's considered the tara, pure, clean blood, so to say. And if she has a girl, the pasuk says and then she's tamei. Sorry, 2 weeks initially. V'shishim yom, v'sheshes yom, and 66 days after 14. Yeah, it's 66 days taste of the mitara. So she has 14 days of tuma, but then she has 66, makes up a complete of 80 of that she's pure. I don't think Rashi mentioned.
Just as an interesting note, that means that on both the days that they have to wait for the initial days and for the extended days are doubled for a daughter. It's
It
goes from
doubles double,
7 to
but
14 and 33 to 66.
yeah, but the question is the machlekes of Levi and Rav is that according to Rav, it just flows. Meaning to say is that she goes to the mikveh after 7 14 days, even if she's still bleeding, because the Torah changed the Torah says it's mayin echad, it's one source, and we don't care. The source now starts to be pure blood. I mean, that's what it seems more from the pasuk. Levi says no, she has to. It's two mayin on us, and means two sources. So the first source has to stop first before she starts second. So even though the Torah says 7 to 14 days, it's only if she stops in between, before or at the 7 to 14 day cutoff date. But if she continues to bleed from her initial birth, then she can't go to the mikveh until she starts bleeding. That's what Levi says. Which in theory is what we paskin today. We paskin today, not because we agree with Levi necessarily, but today we don't. There's no such thing as dam tahor. So any blood is we wait 7 days. But those days they were today most women don't know when they're nida or ziva azava. That's why we're always chayshish. That's why we always wait 5 days and we always wait 7 days, no matter what. Even though halachically it would be a situation which would be the 7 nida days and 11 azava days. Okay, so yeah, but a good question. Okay, not sure. I'll check it up and see. I'm sure there's someone who gives the reason for it. Okay, so that's the machlek. So again, so here comes a question between the Zaken Mamre that if you would paskin according to the one which is not halachic accepted opinion by the Sanhedrin, then she would be considered a tamei shenichnas le'mikdash. Okay, what's a dam ziva? Dam ziva is a machlekes Rebellious Elder and Rabbi Shua. What is the dam ziva? The question's like this. That's why the women stopped. They just didn't take any more risks because there's so many complications to considering when is she a zav or not. What happens if a woman is pregnant and she's mamish at the time of giving birth, right before labor, and she starts to feel labor pains, and while she's feeling the labor pains, she starts to bleed. So the question is that part of the labor blood or is that zava blood? How would we know? We would know is if there's a period of time that she stops having contractions and she still is bleeding. So even though she had contractions for 3 days, she stops and she's bleeding with those contractions and she stops for 24 hours. Well, that's where the machlokes is, how do we count to 24 hours? And then she has a child. Is she considered a woman who had a child while she was a zava? And then it changes things. Meaning to say is then she has to wait, according to all opinions, 7 clean days. Means according to Rav and Levi, as soon as she stops, she goes to the mikveh and then she's tar. But because she gave birth while she was a zava, she has to first clean herself from being a zava, which means she needs to have 7 clean days after she gives birth before, which is what women do today. Again, all these are chashashas that the woman has. That's why a woman today gives birth. She waits 7 clean days before she goes to mikveh, because even though, according to both Rav and Levi, she doesn't have to wait 7 days based on the question, but the question maybe she gave birth, but she was a zava. And even though that's one of the things that are easier to figure out, but all these are chashashas. Okay, so she says, so the question's like this. Here's the machlekes. Dam ziva beplukta to Rebellious Elder Rabbi Shua. The time we learn kishta shleishes yom. She has contractions. Kishta is like from what kasha. It's difficult. I mean, she has contractions for 3 days straight. B'toich achadas yom. And when is she having it? Not in her you made nida, because then it wouldn't make a difference. It has to be in her days when she's a zava. So she's officially in her calendar. She should be. These are 11 clean days. She's having contractions and she's bleeding. And 11 days. If she stops having contractions for a meisles, esles means a day, a night and day period, and she has a child, then the question is, so kuharizu yeledis bezoiv. So that's considered. So that means that in fact that she stopped having contractions for 24 hours means that the contractions, that the bleeding had nothing to do with her childbirth, because that was just contractions of bleeding, not of childbirth, and therefore she became a zava. Then she's a yeledis bezoiv. She gave birth while she was a zoiv, and therefore she has to count 7 clean days. Divrei Rebellious, that's Rebellious. Rabbi Shua says, "Laila v'yom kilei l'Shabbos v'yom yishashavse min atzar v'lo min adam." So Rabbi Shua says 2 things. One is, how do we consider the 24 hours? Is it 24 hours, 2 o'clock to 2 o'clock? Or does it have to be a proper day like Shabbos? Meaning to say it has to, like Rashi says, if it would start in the middle of the day, then it means it could be that we would need more time, because we start counting the day like by night and evening, a full night, then a full day. But if she started earlier, it's just then those few hours don't count. So let's say she started earlier but didn't go the full 24 hours of Shabbos, let's say, into the night. So then it wasn't considered that she stopped having contractions, and therefore she wouldn't be tamei. So if the Zaken Mamre paskin according to Rabbi Yeshua, and then she went into Beis Hamikdash after she had birth, and she didn't go to the mikveh because she said, Rabbi Yeshua said that I'm not tamei because I didn't give birth while I was a zava. And Rabbi Elazar says you are tamei because we don't care when you start. It's a 24-hour period of a meslas. So then the question is if she's tamei or not when she goes to the Beis Hamikdash. So therefore, it's machlekes if you hold according to Rabbi Shua and Rabbi Elazar, and the Zaken Mamre would rule according to one of the opinions, which is not the opinion of the Sanhedrin. It would become a question again of a zava. But hold on, and he also adds one thing that she has to stop from the tsar v'lemin adam. It means it's not conditional that she stops 24 hours bleeding. She could continue bleeding in that 24-hour period, but if she stops having contractions. So it's the contractions that dictate that she started her labor. If she stops 24 hours for having the contractions, then she's not considered having, then the first 3 days weren't contractions, and they were just that she gave birth in a ziva. I just wanted, this Rashi I'm going to learn. Why? Because I think the questions of the Zaken Mamre are more difficult than say the other ones. So it's the Rashi that says, Kishta Gimel Yom Teich Echad Osayim. So Ksiv Parsha Zava, the halacha is in the laws of Zava. That there's 11 days between when a woman is considered a nida and a zava. If she's not supposed to see blood in the 11 days, if she does, the difference between a zava and a nida is a healthy woman who has a cycle. A zava is an unhealthy woman. A woman should not be seeing blood in those 11 days. If she does, then it's a sign of impurity that's different than the impurity of a nida. So just like a man who sees discharge 3 days is also considered tama. He's considered a zav. A zav and zav are on a high level of tuma. They're not like it's not a light level of tuma. So here's Rashi says that a zav b'achadas yom shebei nida l'nida. She has 11 days between nida and nida. Those are supposed to be her 11 clean days. Shehema yam hamavim leziva. And if she would see blood, then she can become a zav g'dola. The halach of a zav g'dola is, you have to remember, she has to bring a carbon afterwards. If she sees 3 days, if she's a zav she does. Zav ktana means she didn't see 3 days. So v'isha ki yizav zav dam yam rabim, and the Torah says that a woman who bleeds yam rabim means a long amount of time, which is the Torah learns to be 3 days. V'tanya perik b'nei skutim, we learn the laws of nida. The dama machmas atzma le machmas vlad. That the halacha is that if she's bleeding during the childbirth of labor, and it's in 11 days, you would say, well, anyway, she's a zava, she bled 3 days. No, so it says dama machmas atzma le machmas vlad. The bleeding has to be caused by something that's wrong with her personally, nothing to do with the baby. So if it's 3 days that she's in labor and she's bleeding in those 3 days, clearly, and then she has a baby, no 24 hours break, then that's for sure she's not giving birth in a zava. There's no argument there. Magit shadama kishui. From this we learn that the blood of contraction, shiyatza koidim avlad, before the child is born, machmat sar, because of the pain, that the blood comes together with the pain, hakishu of the contractions, enim mevil ziva. That everyone agrees she will not become a zava if she bleeds in the 11 day ziva, if it's clean cut contractions straight into labor. The kolshkin dam shalachar levlad. Of course, if she's bleeding after she gives birth, that's obviously not going to be part of the 3 days of zava. The question, the machlekes between Rabbi Shua and Rebbe Elder is, in the case she sees the blood 3 days, ritzufim in a row, which would in theory make her a zava. And she's having contraction. However, v'shafsa, she stops bleeding, or she stops the contractions, according to what Rebbe Elder says. Rabbi Shua says, before the child is born, yoim echad mesleis, a 24-hour period, sheshakta v'nach that she stopped, she calmed down, and her contraction stopped, and then after the 24-hour period of not having contractions, she gives birth, whether she gave birth with contractions or not, then it is considered a Yeledis B'zav, because it means that the first 3 days that she bled has nothing to do with the childbirth. The Vishakivin Shalachar Gimel Shavsa Igla Milsa revealed to us the Lav Machmas Vlad Asa, that the bleeding wasn't part of the childbirth. And therefore she becomes a zava, and therefore what is the halacha if she gives birth while she's a zava? Then she has to count 7 clean days. She doesn't go according to not Rav or Levi, right into her 33 or 66 clean blood. Kedin zava, like any law of a zava. And until she's able to count those 7 clean days, she doesn't start counting according to any of opinion. Meaning to say it has nothing to do with Rav's opinion that says Mayin Echad. Rav says Mayin Echad, says fine, of course it's Mayin Echad, but it has nothing to do. A woman who's a Zava has to have 7 clean days. I'm not sure why. That's a good question. Why? If Rav says it's Mayin Echad, Torah Tima, Torah Tara, but that's halacha. Zava has to count 7 clean days. Even if it's 2 weeks later. Even if it's after the whole 80 days. And after her 80 days, she needs 2 sacrifices. One for the giving birth. Every woman who gives birth gives a sacrifice of an atonement of the childbirth period. That's what a woman has, for the Torah says, because of things that she could have experienced or said during her childbirth. And one for being a zav, like every woman who's a zav has to bring a carbon. So Rashi continues, according to Rabbi Elazar, according to Rabbi Shua, it has to be a night and a day. According to Rabbi Shua, it doesn't help. According to Rabbi Shua, if she stops at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, We don't really start counting until, let's say, 6 o'clock in the evening, when it becomes evening. So those 4 hours is a question. Is that part of the 24-hour period or not? Rebbe Eliezer l'chumra, and therefore Rebbe Eliezer is machmer. And he says, no, we start counting right away, and she becomes a zava no matter when she starts seeing her blood, as long as there's a 24-hour period. Rebbe Shula kul v'hanadavish is done in the cars, and therefore could turn into a case of kares. Okay, I thought Rashi was going to tell us something else about the karbanis. Let's continue in the Gemara, back into the Talmud. Okay. The pasuk again. We're learning from the pasuk in Dvarim that says, "Kipalim chadavar." The mishvat ben dam ladam ben din ledin. So now we're holding midim ledin. We did already yipalim imcha davar lemishpat ben dam ladam. Now, what is the case of din din? The Torah tells us about all these cases where the Zaken Mamre argues. So what's the case of din and din that is connected to kares? There's 3 kind of cases of judgment where the Zaken Mamre can disagree with the Sanhedrin in a machlekes. That could be a question of kares, and those are the laws of monetary questions. That's something that's to do with the life and death, meaning punishable by death, or if you have to get malchus. So what is the case of mamonis? What would be the argument with the Zaken Mamre disagrees again? So where would there be the kares scenario in mamonis is ownership of the money. If there's an argument, if you have to pay something. So it's obviously the question is, if one opinion says you do have to pay, another opinion says don't have to pay, and you pay and you're not supposed to pay, or you don't pay and you're supposed to pay, the question is who owns that money? And if you go and you engage a woman with that money, this means money that you don't own, you don't have ownership on that money. You can't engage a woman with money that's not yours. So then she's not engaged. Then it becomes very complicated if she's considered an engaged woman, if she has relations. Is that a person who has relations with kares? If someone else engages her afterwards, if you were never engaged the first time, so then the second engagement is an engagement. Let's say the first husband thinks that he's the husband. Now he's having relations with a woman that's married to someone else, thinking that it's his wife, and it's not, because the money he gave wasn't his. So this is how it has, like Ariel said a few weeks ago, a knockoff effect that could cause kares. So what's the case of dinim mamonis? Bepilkta de Shmuel v'Rabavo, and the disagreement of Shmuel and Rabavo. The Amr Shmuel says like this: Shnaim shadanu dinem din el shnikr bezin chotzev. Simple question, simple scenario. Rashi says he could have brought many cases, but he brought this case. Who decides if you owe money or not? Right, that's a big question. Someone says you owe me money, and I say I don't owe you money, and you go to court. Is the court qualified to decide? If the court is not qualified to decide, then they have no business giving a ruling if you owe money or not. And if the person goes and takes the money that's not his or hers, based on that, it becomes a complication of ownership of the money. Then in the case of an engagement, it becomes a question of kares if she's engaged with money that's not the person's in the first place. So here the question like this: if a court of 2 people, 2 judges, sit judgment on a case and they give a ruling, right? So that Shmuel says it's a judgment, and the ruling's a ruling, and the ownership of the money, whatever the ruling is according to their rule. It's a chutzpah bezdin, but it's a bezdin. I mean, don't sit down 2; you have to have 3. But if you do 2, then it's considered a ruling, and then the ruling isn't applied. Therefore, it's possibly there's a change of ownership of money. Ravo says no, it's not a judgment. There was no case here. There was no ruling. So what's again Rashi say clearly? Then it's a question of ownership of money. When there's a question of ownership of money, it could fall into a case of kares. If he uses that money to engage a woman, she's not really engaged, or she is really engaged, whatever the question, or whoever the ruling is, and it could end up causing a situation where someone has relations with someone that he shouldn't be having relations with, not knowing that she was never. For instance, if the first husband, the first person gives her money and engages her, and it's not really his money, so she's not engaged. And then, like I said, the second person goes and engages her, and the first person goes and has relations with her. It's a question of kares. Okay, so that's like another case of the Zaken Mamre. What is the case of dinin nefashis? Where's the case where it's capital, a question of a capital punishment that could end up being kares? So this is also a question of monetary ownership. What is the argument? We learned this argument before in the Sanhedrin of Rebbe and the rabbis. What's the case? The case is of a person who strikes someone intending to kill them, but strikes the wrong person, hits the woman. Right? So the Torah tells us the story about that. We learned that case there. It says, if you look on the side, those who have it, Vayikra, in the Vayikra, the 14th chapter, verse 37. There's two people who are fighting. And he strikes the pregnant woman, and the child comes out. So if you have to pay damages. Fine. So the question is like this. So where does it come into Machlekes? Machlekes is within nefashis. So Beplukted the Rabbi Rabbanan, in the argument of Rabbi Hakadosh and the rabbis. The Tani we learned. Rabbi says, when it's at the nefesh tachas nefesh, the Torah punishes that you have to give that you kill the person that you hit by mistake. You didn't mean to hit that person. You meant to kill someone, but you hit the wrong person. So it says then you have to pay life for life. And Rebbe says nefesh mammon. Are you sure you have to pay monetary punishment? Maybe it's that you have to get put to death for killing someone. You wanted to kill someone, you just killed the wrong person. Maybe you get put to death. So he says, before when it talks about striking the woman and killing the baby, it says Nisina v'nemen Nisina Lamata, and it says over here also v'nesata nefesh. So it says the word Nasina, which is giving. Just like the first case, it is monetary. Afkan Mammon, the Nasata Nefesh doesn't mean actual soul for soul. Rabbi says if you strike someone that you wanted to kill, one person, you kill the next person, so that's not, you pay a monetary fine, you don't get put to death. And the rabbis disagree. The rabbis say you get put to death. So if that case, so Rabbi said, like if you look in the Rashi, Nasati Nefesh of Nefesh, so Rashi says, on the other Miskaven, you had intention, the Harigaseh, to kill A. The Harigaseh, and you killed B. Rabbi says you pay monetary punishment. Rabbanan Patri and Rabbanan says you don't pay money. You don't pay monetary money. According to the rabbis, I believe you get put to death, but it doesn't mean it's nothing to do. Monetary money you don't have to pay. Like we learned before in the previous parak. And if so you have to pay money, obviously not to the person. The person's dead, so you have to pay money to their dependables, right? The Yarshim, the people who inherit their money. If the person feels the ruling is that, like Rabbi, that I get money, and he takes the money by force, and then goes and engages a woman with it, so then the money, according to the rabbis, wasn't theirs, because you don't get punished, you don't have a monetary responsibility. So it wasn't their money. Then again, it becomes questionable money. It becomes money that's not theirs, therefore she's not engaged. So it could turn out again, in the case of Rebbe and rabbis, so the question is not about putting someone to death. It's talking about chorus. The chorus would be in a case where because the rabbis say she's not the Yorsh and the family of the person that was killed unintentionally, meaning he intended to kill, but he killed the wrong person. So therefore it wasn't their money. It wasn't their money. So if they engage a woman with it, it could again lead into a situation where a woman or a man have relations when they're not supposed to, and therefore it could be a case of chorus. Okay, so that's the next argument with Rebbe and the rabbis in another monetary case that says nefesh. The next case, dini makos. How could it be in a case of lashes? Where's the lashes where it could turn into a case of Zaken Mamre where there would be an outcome of chorus? So dini makos plukted the Rabbi Shmuel v'Rabbanan is a question of a disagreement of Rabbi Shmuel and the rabbis. What is the disagreement? It's now we've learned makis begimel, that how many people have to sit judgment in a case where the defendant could be getting a punishment of malchus. So the rabbi says makis begimel, a court of 3 people is enough to convict someone of lashes. Mishum Rabbi Shmuel Amru, but in the name of Rabbi Shmuel it was said b'chaf gimel. It turns into a capital court case because there could be a situation where you're not supposed to kill. You're not supposed to give lashes. You do give lashes. You give too many lashes, so it could turn into a capital case. And therefore, Rabbi Shmuel says there has to be a court of 23. If a court of 3 is to make a ruling, and the Zaken Mamre says that you have a court of 3, and you give lashes, right? So the lashes, you had no business giving lashes because only a court of 23 could. So a court of 3 that gives lashes means the person who's giving lashes is not a person who's beating someone. Therefore, you owe the money. And if you owe the money, that money is questionable money because it could be you do owe the money, because it could be a court of 3 is allowed to be a court, or a court you need 23. And therefore, the Zaken Mamre again, the Zaken Mamre who disagrees with the halacha it turns into a monetary questionable case where the money is a questionable ownership, and therefore it's questionable engagement, and therefore it's a questionable case of out of married relationships. Okay, so these are all the same situations. Next case, we're going to try to go a little further. It says benega lenega. Between the pasuk continues kipale that another argument of the Zaken Mamre and the Bezdin would be in the case of leprosy, of negoim. What are the cases in negoim where there's arguments where the Zaken Mamre would say she's either he or she is either has saras, has leprosy or not? And again, if you're leprosy, you are a impure person, and becomes a question of eating sacrifices or going into the temple, which could be punishable by kares. So the question is over here. There's three different types of arguments where the Zaken Mamre could disagree with the halachic ruling, whether it is leprosy on a person, on clothing, or in a house. Nagi Adam, where is there an argument about a neg of an Adam? It's a famous machlekes. We looked at Rabbi Shua Rabbanan, in disagreement of Rabbi Shua and the rabbis. The Tanan, we learned the halacha that there's different halach. The Torah tells us that the laws of leprosy have two signs. One is that the skin turns like an inner kind of white, and there has to be also either a growth or white hair that grows inside of it. So it says like this. The halacha is like this. Tanurban we learned. The time we learned. Im beheres kaidem, if the beheres, which is the leprosy itself, comes first, and then the seir lavan, and then comes the white hair grows in the leprosy, that's a sign of tameh. There's different signs that make the leprosy impure. So if first the leprosy happened, and then one of the signs is two white hairs come, so that's, everyone agrees that's the Torah classic case of impure leprosy. However, im ser lavan kaidem lebeheres, what happens if you have white hair on your arm, right? And only then the leprosy grows in the white hair, means in the place where the white hair is, then the white hair is not a sign of tummy. The white hair was there first. Therefore, it means the white hair has to grow out of the leprosy. That's the halacha. So therefore, im ser lavan kadam lebeheres tar. That's not a sign of leprosy, of impure leprosy. But the question is, let's say not everyone knows where they have white hair, right? You don't check your body the whole time. So what about suffix? You don't know. You don't know if you first had the leprosy, you first had the white hair. So then the question, again, a suffix is a doubt. So the question is, what's the ruling? Is the person, he or she, impure because we don't know? Or the person pure because, or is the person pure? Later it becomes a machlekes of Rab and Mesifta Derakia, I believe. So the Gemara says in Baba Basiya. So the Gemara says, suffix, tameh. So the halacha is, if it's suffix, we go stringent and we say the person's tameh. Rabbi Shua Omer, keha. It says keha. Keha means it became lighter. Ma keha, amarava keha tara. What does it mean? Keha means it becomes pure, and therefore, according to Rabbi Shua, if you have a doubt, she's pure or he's pure. Doesn't make a difference to man and woman. So obviously, if the Zaken Mamre takes one of the rulings that's not the halacha, it turns out that it allows X, what tells about X, Y, and Z, you're not tameh, because we don't know if the white hair came first, and that person marches into the Beis Hamikdash. If the halacha ruling is according to the other opinion, according to the rabbis, that person's impure. It's a question of kares in the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, nagi batim. What's the case of negoyim of leprosy in a house? So a house also could have leprosy. The Torah tells us. There's an argument of Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, and the rabbis. What is the question? Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, Aimer, La'olam ena bais tami ad shiyira kishnei grisin lashnei avonim b'shtei ksalim b'keren zavis. It says like this. The pasuk says, means on what part of the house does the leprosy have to be in the house? So it says like this. The verse says about the kohen, that the kohen goes into the house to check the questionable leprosy in the house. It says v'rasa nega v'hine nega, so he comes to see the leprosy in the house. V'hine nega b'kirois habayis. The word kir is a door, is a wall. Kirois is walls, plural. Shekarurais yirakrois, shakrurais yirakrois, ayadamdamais, whatever the different colors of the leprosy. Umarheim shafa minakir, and it's. But what do we have? It says minakir, and it says kirois. So it seems like a contradiction. First it says plural, the walls, and then it says the wall. So which one is it? Is it have to be a leprosy that's on two walls or one wall? So here comes the machlekes. So again, the going bottom it to Rebbe Eliezer, Reb Shimon, Rabbanan. Ittanam we learned Rebbe Eliezer, Reb Shimon Eimer. Rebbe Eliezer, the son of Reb Shimon, says, how does the house become tamei? Only in a case it has to be the size of 2 grisin, which is a size. Al shtei avonim, on 2 stones. B'shtei ksalim, on 2 walls. B'keren zavis, that's only a case of a corner. Where do you have a wall that's 2 walls? Is only a corner. A corner is part of the right, or part of the north and part of the east, or something, wherever the corner is. So only a corner wall could be the questionable house. My time, and it has to be a length of 2 grisim and the width of 1 gris, which is a size. Gris is a kind. My time, what's the reason of Rebbe Eliezer, Reb Shimon? Because the verse says kir, like I said, it says singular, and it says kirois, plural. Kir, what kind of wall is kirois? Is 2 walls? It means where's the part of the wall that's the part of the wall that's connected to 2 walls? It's only a corner. And therefore, according to Rebbe Eliezer, Reb Shimon, if there were to be leprosy on 1 wall of 2 stones, like the rabbis, he says it's not tamei. Person who walks into a house that has leprosy becomes tamei. If you walk into a house that has leprosy, and Rebbe Eliezer, Reb Shimon were to say that house is not tamei because it wasn't in a corner, and the Zaken Mamre rules according to that, so he ruled and told the person that you're not impure because the halacha is like a Rebbe Eliezer, Reb Shimon, and it could be the halacha is not like a Rebbe Eliezer, and he's been warned that the ruling is according to the rabbis. Doesn't make a difference if it's on a corner or on 2 different stones on the same wall. They don't learn the girsa of kirois kir. So such a case where the person would walk into the Beis Mikdash or eat from the karbanis is a question of karis. Okay, where is the case of clothing? What's in the Gei Begadim? What's the case of clothing? We looked at Rabbi Yonasan ben Avtulmus Rabbanan. In the argument of Rabbi Yonasan, son of Avtulmus, and the rabbis, the Tanya, we learned Rabbi Yonasan ben Avtulmus Aimer. Minayin lepricha. How do we know? That's when it grows on the clothing. It means again the leprosy is on the clothing. And the clothes, by a person, the rule is that if you have a leprosy and then it goes all over the body, that itself purifies the person. There has to be a part of the body that does not have leprosy. What about pricha? The halacha is what's the whole body mean? Does it have to be the whole visual body? Means if every single part of the body or only the exposed parts of the body, meaning exposed, if a person were to stand naked, not every part of the body is visual to the kohen. So, but that's very technical laws. But what happens if that same thing happens to clothing? The leprosy spreads on the entire clothing. The how do we know that if it spreads on the clothing, it's tar? Nemra karachas v'gabachas badam. It says the term karachas and gabachas, which is the descriptions of the baldness going. It means the case of the person is where the person goes bald on the whole head. There's no part of the head that's not bald. And it says gabachas by a person. Nemra karachas v'gabachas begadim. It also uses the term karachas and gabachas on the clothing. Ma'alahalin parch b'kulatar. Just like by a person, if the whole head goes bald, or all the hair falls off, that's a sign that the person is no longer tamei, is tahar, or that it was never tahar, never tamei. Afkam parach b'kuli tahar. Also by begadim, that's tahar. And there is a disagreement. So again, if a person were to be touched and come into contact with a garment that was ruled to be pure and it's really impure, and then you go into the temple, comes a question: this Zaken Mamre is going to be ruling that something that causes the case of kares. We're going to stop here. We have one more page to the middle, pretty much the bottom of the page. We're going to go through a few more cases. Again, this is basically, I don't know, I don't know if I've ever seen anything like this in the Gemara. But the Gemara Pashut could have just made it easy. Just said, if you can, there's some cases, but no, the Gemara said out there, tell me every single case in the Pasuk, Yipalim Chadavar, every single case where the Zaken Mamre argues, where it could be a question of kares, and the beauty is Pashut's going through the whole Torah. These are machlaikas that we find it all over the Masechtas of different places, that there's different disagreements of different cases, where the Zaken Mamre could disagree, and it could turn into a questionable case of kares. Any questions? Otherwise, we will reconvene next week. All right. Laila Tov, take care. All the best.